This is Coach Ren of Fortitude Training Systems, and this is Technique Deep Dive Squat Edition. The squat can be one of the most challenging exercises for multiple reasons. One of which being our daily lives, we spend a lot of time seated, and we also spend a lot of time hunched over looking at our phones. This type of posture is not really conducive to a proper squat and exercise in general, for that matter. So what we want to do first is take a look at our posture through some sort of means, whether it's going to your physical therapist or getting some sort of movement evaluation from a good coach. That's going to go a long way in helping you move better in general, avoid pain, and squat with more efficiency. The squat requires proper mechanics of the spine, so maintaining as neutral of a spine as you possibly can. In particular, not allowing yourself to hunch forward or get an over-exaggerated arch in your spine either. Butt wink is very common at the bottom. You'll see some people shift into a rounded spine. That's a very common issue. Tight hips are also another big problem as well. From all of our time seated in our daily lives, our hips get really tight in the front. We get weak glutes. Hamstrings get tight as well. The core gets weak. The lower back gets tight. And it's just a mess when it comes to squatting with proper mechanics and avoiding injury. Weak glutes can also cause the knees to collapse in toward each other on your way up, sometimes even on the way down, especially for ladies with wider hips. That can be a big problem. Tight ankles is another area that needs to be addressed. If you have stiff, not very mobile ankles, that's going to work its way up the chain and cause a train wreck of a squat. If your ankles are too tight, then you're going to pitch forward an excessive amount. It can cause other problems as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of different factors that go into squatting properly, being able to squat well, and squat a lot of weight if that's your goal. Some of the reasons why I have a big challenge on my hands sometimes with certain people that walk through the door and want to start a strength training program. If any one of these things is a real issue, we're going to have to address it while I teach the squat and perhaps use alternatives to the barbell version. The barbell version is great because it can allow you to lift more weight with more ease, but it's also challenging because then you have to also think about your upper body and grabbing that bar. And if your shoulders are tight, that's going to be a big problem as well. So we might work on things like a goblet squat or a landmine squat, front squats, something where the weight is in front of you so you don't have to worry about reaching back behind your body and causing potential elbow or shoulder pain. So as I squat, I take a stance that's about shoulder width apart. My toes, I'm going to point out somewhere in the area of 30 degrees. Try not to rack your brain on that. I'm going to have the bar seated on my upper traps, not on my neck, and not down super low on my back either. This is going to secure the bar. And then your hands should be where is comfortable. Some people can get their hands right against their shoulders. Myself and a lot of other people cannot do that. I have fairly tight shoulders myself, so I have to grab the bar wider than most. So after I establish this stance, I'm going to take a breath, hold it. I'm going to come down, driving my hips back, my knees bend at the same time. And my goal is to get my hips below my knees before I come back up. Another thing that we need to talk about are the feet. If you have flat feet, or you tend to pronate when you run or walk, or you have an exaggerated walk like this where your toes point out excessively, these are more issues like tight ankles, particular when your toes are pointing out when you walk. That can be indicative of tight ankles. But when your feet pronate, that can mean that your arch, the muscles of the arch, are weak and need to be strengthened. So there's different ways you can go about doing that, stretching the ankles, stretching the big toe, as well as strengthening the foot with some balancing exercises. Not using orthotics. Orthotics can be good in the short term, but in the long term, they will make those arch muscles weaker. So another thing to think about is if those knees, again, if those knees collapse in, it could be coming from the foot. Oftentimes it comes from the hip, weak external rotators of the hip, the glute medius, but it can also come from flat feet pronating. So as you can see, there's a lot of different problems that can occur. Setting your stance is key. Some people prefer a wider stance, others a more narrow stance. Generally, again, I have people start off about shoulder width apart with their toes pointing outward. All right, so for most people that come in to see me, when they point their toes out, they're able to squat to a much lower depth with ease than if they were to point their toes straight ahead. So we can argue back and forth about whether pointing the toes straight ahead is better or if toes out is better. But for me personally, toes out seems to work really well for a lot of people to get them squatting earlier. And if your goal is to squat with your toes forward, you prefer to do it that way, by all means, have at it. I've just found that pointing the toes out is very helpful and very beneficial. This type of stance also allows people to open their hips up more, use the adductors, which can assist in hip extension. So as we come up, this is hip extension. They assist in that along with the glutes and hamstrings. So the muscles that we work, the glutes, the hamstrings help to produce that hip extension, which is huge. In the squat, there's a lot of hip motion here. The quadriceps straighten the knees, so they're assisting as well. The adductors, like we talked about before. Now, those are some of the primary movers. Also, some of the muscles around the ankles as well. And then we think about the stabilizers, the core. When you're squatting heavy especially, the core helps to stabilize the spine and keep it in a more neutral position. Also, the muscles of the back that attach to the spine help to hold and lock that spine in that more neutral position as well. So as you can see here, there's a lot going on, a lot more than just your quads or just your legs working. All of this is working to support the weight and keep your spine in a rigid position to avoid overstraining the smaller, weaker muscles of the back that are thinner, longer, smaller than the glutes or the hamstrings or even the quads. So that upper body, the muscles of the trunk, are there to help keep your spine safe, but also to make the movement more efficient. It's much more efficient to keep the spine neutral than it is to round or pitch forward, because then it takes a lot more energy and a lot more effort to lift the same weight. So while performing the squat, we've already talked a little bit about the different things that can go wrong. So one of the big things is what's called knock knee or knee valgus. So this can happen oftentimes when people just maybe don't know how to squat properly, or they have really tight inner thighs that pull the knees inward, or they have weak outer thighs or external rotators of the hip, in particular the glute medius, that don't keep the knee pointing out in the same direction as the toes. So as I mentioned, the toes we want to try to point out somewhere between 15 to 30 degrees, and the knees need to track in the same direction. So they need to point the same direction as the toes throughout the entire squat. So we don't want knees in, we don't want knees out. And also notice that my feet come up when I do that. You want the foot to remain planted at all times when you squat. The entire foot, not just the toes, not just the heels, the entire foot needs to stay grounded, rooted to the floor. So when we squat, we want those knees to be pointing out at all times. So as I'm coming up in particular, because most of the time this happens on the way up out of the bottom of the squat, or the hole, as they say, I want to think about driving my knees out away from the midline of my body. So this is in particular for those of you that do struggle with this. Maybe you saw it, maybe you videoed yourself and you saw that your knees come in, or someone else told you or you saw it in the mirror or whatever. All right. So you want to think about driving your knees out. Some people think about trying to spread the floor with your feet, pushing the floor out and away from your body. You can also think about that, or think about driving your knees out and squeezing your glutes as you squat. So activating the proper muscles that we want to use is also key when we do a squat. Okay, so think about driving the knees out. Think about squeezing your cheeks, not these ones, okay? And you'll find that, well, hopefully you'll find that those knees stay more in line with your toes. If you're still having trouble, you can't quite feel your glutes well enough, or your knees just don't seem to be going out no matter what you do, then it's time to drop that weight down, check your ego for a little while, and build those mechanics again and slowly build your weight back up over a period of time. How fast? I don't know, but just make sure every rep is perfect. If it's not, you need to go down lower or progress slower. How did that train wreck of a squat look? All right, we call this the stripper squat. Hips drive up early, torso gets about parallel to the floor, and the knees straighten so that then your lower back is left to do the rest of the work at the end. Not a great place to be, not an efficient squat, and not conducive to lifting a lot of weight, again, if that's your goal. But if you're just looking to do the squat properly and efficiently, then you're gonna want to not do this, okay? So as we squat, we want the knees and the hips to straighten at the same rate. So if I all of a sudden pop my hips, that's my knees straightening out much faster than my hips. And then that's all the lower back here. Okay, not a great place to be because again, those muscles of the back are much smaller, they're much weaker, so you're gonna risk having to dump the bar on the floor, have somebody save your butt, or worse, something much worse. So let's try to avoid this at all costs. And again, use the muscles of the hips, the muscles of the knees. So as I come up, I want to keep my chest up. Think about pushing my back into the bar. If I'm holding a bar, I drive my back as I come up. So again, chest up, back, and my knees and hips straighten at the same pace. Now, the dreaded butt wink. So as we get down to the bottom of the squat, I mentioned earlier, sometimes we get this rounding that occurs at the bottom. This is very common amongst a lot of people, different ages, populations, and so forth. So this one can be pretty tricky to correct. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that you can do to correct this, but it can take some time. And it can take some patience in order to do it right. So if I assume a position, so it's called quadruped or just simply all fours, I'm going to simulate a squat position. So chest out, I brace my core a bit, stay tight there. And then I simulate a squat from here. I rock back and I try my best to maintain my neutral spine while getting my hips past my knees. I rock back, and this takes all but the entire weight of your body and the bar, of course, off, and just allows you a chance to feel how that spine stays in the same position. So I'd recommend doing this next to your phone or next to a mirror so you can really see what your spine's doing. If you find when you come back you're rounding, and you need to avoid that. Keep the chest out. Don't allow the spine to move at all. If you want to take this a step further, this makes it quite a bit harder. You lift your knees off the floor slightly and do the same thing. Again, trying to keep that spine from moving at all. From the quadruped position, now you can try standing and doing some bodyweight squats. You can also do assisted squats using some band tension to help you. And we try to do the same thing. We try to maintain the same angle of that lower back in particular to keep you from dumping into that butt wink. Not too bad. I've been working on mine because I've had this problem myself. Once you've mastered this with your body weight squat, you can try doing it with a goblet squat. Here, holding the weight in front, doing the same thing. Now, this doesn't exactly simulate the barbell back squat version because the barbell squat puts the weight on your back and causes you to pitch forward a bit. So this position is a bit different and it's a little harder to maintain that neutral spine when you do them. So it's not going to be an exact thing, but again, slowly build your weights back up over time. Now, if you have trouble getting low, getting the crease of your hip below your knee into a full depth squat, or if you can't squat ass to grass, you just don't have the hip mobility or ankle mobility for that, then there are ways to help you. One, start stretching, start doing mobility exercises to improve your mobility in your hips, in your ankles, as well as your upper body as well, if you have difficulty holding that bar. Working your way down to a low squat depth is going to be really beneficial, especially for those that are aging, getting up and down off the toilet or out of a really comfortable lazy boy style chair or a couch or whatever it may be, or just bending down to pick something up off the floor. It's going to be really important. It's also going to be really important for anybody else that's breathing, really. If you want to build muscle, if you want to get stronger, squats are the king of exercises for anybody out there, anybody that is capable of doing them. So being able to squat low, very valuable. How do you work on getting there? Well, work on your mobility, number one, and work on your stability and your strength as well. So if you are not capable of getting low, say you're able to do a half squat, okay? You're able to squat down to about here without much trouble. But then once you go lower your balance, you shift around, you come up to your toes, or you lean forward because your ankles are super tight, then what we're going to need to do is, beyond the mobility work, we're also going to need to just work on getting stronger at that lower depth. You don't hang out down there, perhaps. Maybe whenever you do squat in daily life, you just kind of go part way down, or you've been doing an exercise class and they don't really pay attention to your form at all. So you just do half squats all the time and you're really strong there. Well, you haven't been working down here, so of course you're not strong. So what we need to do is set yourself up with an aerobic stepper or maybe some sort of a bench behind you. You can use a chair at home or anything that is stable and sturdy, and you simply squat down to that. Try to squat down, touch whatever it is you're using, and stand back up. And try to make whatever it is you're using just a couple inches lower than what you're accustomed to doing. All right, so you may have to sit right down on it a couple times before you really get comfortable, but the goal is to just gently touch and come back up. And over the course of several weeks or several months, while you're doing your mobility work, you work on gradually getting to a lower squat over time. The last thing I want to touch on is that upper body mobility once again. So being able to grab a bar or being able to just reach behind you perhaps or overhead, really important thing to be able to do in just our everyday lives, but also being able to do a squat. So holding the bar while it's on your upper traps, you need to be able to do that safely and without pain. Then you're going to need to work on things like your lat mobility, stretching the lats out. This can be done. This can be done in a doorway with your arms up, and you simply step forward and lean forward till you feel that lat stretch. You can do a prayer stretch on the floor, which is like a, I believe, child's pose in yoga. Arms up, and you should feel down under your armpit stretching. You can also do a doorway stretch where you get your arms on the frame of the door and you lean forward until you feel stretch through your chest. This can also be done in a corner as well, the corner of your house or just your wall, and you just lean forward towards the wall, opening that chest up. All right, those are a couple of very commonly tight areas in the shoulders that will restrict your arms from reaching back. One other one to focus on is the triceps. So reaching over your head and pulling back and stretching that tricep out, or any other form of a tricep stretch could be really beneficial to reaching back. Thank you for watching this technique deep dive. As you can see, there's a lot of details, and this certainly wasn't even an exhaustive list of different things that you need to focus on when it comes to your squat. Not all these will apply to you, but maybe one or two of them will. And if you find this helpful, please share it with a friend, hit that like button, and subscribe.